So it's been almost a month since I finished reading this one, so I have to admit my memory is a little bit rusty. I have Simone de Beauvoir. She came to stay in between my reading of this and the present. This is Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, Simone de Beauvoir's recollection of her childhood and her her school age years, I'm going to say. So this was published in 1958 in French originally. This edition is translated by James Kirkup. I've never heard of the translator, but I think he did a decent job based on the fact that I loved this so much. So what it is kind of a highly introspective memoir dealing with Simone de Beauvoir's early life, her childhood, her religious struggles, her struggles with education, the expectations of her parents, her early friendships, her first love, her later loves as well, right up to the moment when she meets Sartre for the first time. It's a bit of an emotional roller coaster, perhaps just for me, because I related to the thoughts and feelings that she was sharing so much. She struggles against her parents' expectations a lot, which I have to admit it's not something I relate to because, as it would seem, my parents have almost no expectations for me. I mean, apart from being religious, which is apparently an expectation that I have not fulfilled, but there were no educational expectations for me, no marriage expectations, as there seemed to be very much for Simone. And her problem is that her father didn't seem to think it was natural for a woman of her class to be pursuing a higher education on the level that she does as a child. Her father is very proud of her as she reads, as she does well in school, but once she hits puberty and starts to become a woman, her father is less impressed, and she, at least in her recollection, she seems to feel that he rejects her a little bit. He wants her to be more feminine, more like the other women in their class. Instead, she is dressing in a way that is perhaps not suited to an extremely feminine woman, and she is pursuing education. She's less concerned about society, about doing the things she should be doing, and more concerned about getting an education, making her mark, making an impact. She becomes infatuated with intellectuals and philosophers and speakers, and for me that's something I can relate to. I remember in my teenage years those periods of absolute infatuation when you start reading history, when you come across things like Machiavelli and Karl Marx for the first time, when you start to realize that there is indeed an intellectual world out there beyond the novels that your parents have handed you. Her parents, her mother specifically, censored her reading material, but of course she read stuff anyway, just as I began to do in my teenage years. There weren't strict rules in my house, but it was understood that there were things that I should be reading and things I should not be reading, and eventually I just shifted into whatever I wanted to read, and there was no discussion. But Simone was in a place where she would hide things. She would hide things that had sex in them. I have to admit I did the same thing. Many a Harlequin novel hidden in my dresser drawer at 14, but she was also struggling to navigate friendships. She has a very intimate relationship with a girl, a woman named Zara. Uh, you can tell that she is absolutely in love with Zara, whether it's a sexual love or not. Probably not, it doesn't seem to be, but there is a sense that Simone was very much in love with Zara, and her opinion mattered very much, and she wanted Zara in her life, just as many young people do when they come across someone who they believe is their equal, so to speak. Then, of course, she finds herself fighting Zara's fight because Zara is in the same class as her, but she's perhaps not as independent and strong as Simone. There are things that Zara does not want, but she goes along with it anyway, and perhaps out of duty, out of norms, or perhaps her mind really does change. Zara does want that traditional marriage with the traditional children. But Simone also becomes infatuated and in love with, I believe it's her second cousin, Jacques. And Jacques is one of the first people who really opens things up for Simone intellectually. He gives her books to read. She believes that he is smarter than her, and because he's smarter, she is attracted to him, and she wants a relationship with him. She even fantasizes and hopes that someday they will get married, and she finds herself going through emotional turmoil over that. Because this is a memoir, because Simone is writing her own story, she gets emotional control over the story. She gets to control how events are portrayed, which I think is absolutely delightful because she does it very well, and every little experience in her life, she paints it as something that made her who she is, something that made her stronger. Nothing is wasted in here. Her religious devotion in her youth, the way she lost her religion, the way she struggled to hold on, even when she knew that she'd lost it, like, as I could say, I did perhaps in my own teenage years, but that all builds up to her eventual happiness, her eventual feeling that she has become stronger and smarter and more experienced through every event, pleasant or unpleasant, in her life. And on top of all this, the writing is beautiful. As with a number of novels I read, I was taking notes as I read, but I think I'm just going to share one quote for this novel. I wrote it down and then I was flipping through and I couldn't find it, so don't ask me exactly where it shows up. But she says, "Literature took the place in my life that had once been occupied by religion," which I think is a very profound statement. I think it's something that I can relate to, that a lot of people can relate to, and after reading Memoirs of a Dutiful Daughter, I can say I'm very excited to continue my journey with Simone de Beauvoir, because she is exactly the author that I need at this time in my life. She speaks to me in a way that perhaps she wouldn't have a few years ago, and perhaps she won't a few years from now. I'd like to think that the impact that her writing has on me is timeless, but from experience I know that's probably not true.